Turning our attention now to some more of the major stories that we are following for today as I take this live look over at the White House in Washington, D.C., because we're focused on this potential government shutdown that continues to loom here in the U.S. Democratic and Republican congressional leaders, they're heading to the White House today for a meeting with President Trump in a late effort to avoid a government shutdown. But both sides have shown hardly any willingness to budge from their entrenched positions. That is according to reporting from the Associated Press, which goes on to say that if government funding legislation is not passed by Congress and signed by President Trump on Tuesday night, many government offices across the nation will be temporarily shuttered and non-exempt federal employees will be furloughed, adding to the strain on workers and the nation's economy. Joining us now to discuss all of this is political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, always good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
All right, so let's just start with this. So how rare is it for the president to be meeting with all of these congressional leaders, especially when we talk about that possible government shutdown?
Well, no, it's not rare, and we've had about 14 government shutdowns if you go back to 1980. So it happens quite often that oftentimes when the president will meet with congressional leaders of both parties at the beginning of a congressional session, during a congressional session. Bill Clinton oftentimes met with Newt Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, and Trent Lott, the Majority Leader during his administration. George W. Bush, his last 2 years in office, oftentimes met with Nancy Pelosi, who was then the Speaker of the House. So it's really quite prevalent for the president to meet with the leaders of both parties, although this administration, it's been a little bit less than other administrations.
Rich, there is a lot of differences when it comes to how both sides of the aisle are trying to fund the government for this next fiscal year. What are some of the biggest challenges that they're going to face when trying to come to a consensus?
I think they're really in an inflection point here, and that the Democrats, I think, are trying to make it so that there's an extension of healthcare tax credits from the Affordable Care Act that was signed by President Obama back in 2010. The act was very unpopular then. Today, it's a lot more popular. As a matter of fact, Steve Lynch of Massachusetts is the only Democrat who voted against the act that's still in Congress. But that's basically what I think the Democrats are kind of hanging their political hats on, is trying to get this extension. The Republicans, John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader from South Dakota, has called that unserious and called that absurd. So that's what they're going to be trying to negotiate. I think on the Democrats' behalf, I think that Chuck Schumer took a lot of hits politically by agreeing to a continuing resolution in March and agreeing to give the Republicans the votes so that there would not be a government shutdown. At the time in the House of Representatives, all but one member of the House of Representatives voted for voted for the government shutdown, whereas in the United States Senate, they had the requisite 7 votes that they needed. With folks in the leadership like Dick Durbin of Illinois, for example, and Gary Peters, who's a former chairman of the Senate Congressional Campaign Committee. There's really been an upheaval within the Democratic Party against the leadership. I think at the time, Hakeem Jeffries would barely mention the name Chuck Schumer. So from a political standpoint, I think the left wing of the Democratic Party, I think, wants this to really be an issue, and they really want to make this an issue. And I think that that's part of the reason why they are basically trying to be as intransigent as they possibly can. On the other hand, Trump is also being very intransigent, so it's going to be very interesting to see kind of this tete-a-tete that's going to come, I think, if there's not some sort of an agreement by Tuesday at midnight.
So it's interesting that you mentioned, and of course, a lot of the reporting, that healthcare is really the focus when it comes to trying to find that agreement. Now, why is it so difficult, especially given the fact that, Democrats, Republicans alike, they do want Americans to have that full healthcare. So what is really holding them back from finally just getting that on the table?
I think it comes down to budget priorities here, and I think it comes down to Donald Trump and the administration want some of these tax cuts, want some of these tax credits to expire. The Trump administration. Also, I think that the Trump administration, at least in the big beautiful bill, there are certain truncations of Medicare, of Medicaid rather. I think it depends. Obviously, the Democrats will make the argument that this is going to hurt families. The Republicans will say that they're just putting work requirements in. So that's going to be something that's really going to be a sticking point. I think the Democrats, in order, they see a very strong possibility that they could take back the House in the 2026 midterm elections, and they're really going to make Medicaid, and for that matter, make Medicare and just make health care, Social Security in general. They're going to say the Republicans want to try to truncate these social services. And I think that they're going to try to really make this. They know how important it is. They know how popular Medicaid is in terms of the body politics. They're going to try to make this their flagship issue, if you will, in the 2026 midterm elections. And that's partly why I think the Republicans, if you go back to what's happening in Texas, and they're trying to gerrymander the way that they're trying to gerrymander congressional districts, they think this is their way that they can potentially try to keep the House in control of the United States House of Representatives. But of course, in California, the Democrats are going to try to do the same thing, and then potentially in Illinois, and you really could have a snowball effect, if you will, for what could be a very vital in terms of the 2026 midterm election campaign.
Finally, on this topic, Rich, President Trump has said that he fully expects that the government will enter a shutdown this week. Walk us through what's going to happen if that were to be the case.
Well, basically, vital government services will continue. The federal government, for example, will continue to fund Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. They'll continue to pay interest in the national debt. The United States military will continue. The TSA will continue. Well, what will not continue will be services that are viewed as not vital. For example, you may see national parks closed, for example, but it's really kind of on a case-by-case basis. You have what's called essential employees and non-essential employees. And essential employees are those that the federal government believes that they absolutely need. They may be unpaid, but the federal government is still going to continue to utilize their services. And then those that are considered non-essential are going to be not paid, and they're not going to be working during that time period.
All right, we'll wait and see what happens between President Trump and those congressional leaders at that meeting today. Rich, I do want to switch gears now, talk about another major headline, a breaking news story from this last week. New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
Yep.
Officially dropping out of that mayoral race. So I want to get your reaction to this. You have been following this very closely. It's a race that has made national headlines, with even President Trump watching it very closely. So how big of a deal is it that Mayor Adams has decided to drop out?
I don't think it's a particularly big deal. I think I very much expected. I think a lot of people expected it. He was having embarrassing poll numbers for an incumbent mayor who had just won 4 years earlier. He had his numbers literally at 8%. I think he did not want to go through the potential embarrassment. He was not going to get campaign finance funds. So I think it was very much expected that I was actually kind of surprised he stayed in the race for as long as he did. There were rumors that potentially Donald Trump would offer him in some sort of an ambassadorship, maybe ambassadorship to Saudi Arabia or something to that effect. Donald Trump, I think, is going to do everything he possibly can to make sure that Mr. Mamdani, the current frontrunner and the Democratic nominee, is not the next mayor of New York City. He would rather have somebody like Andrew Cuomo. It's kind of interesting that Andrew Cuomo, who was very much an opponent of Donald Trump when he was governor of New York, is now somebody that Donald Trump, at least tacitly, is supporting here. But it's interesting because you have a scenario where he's going to be, by the way, the first one-term mayor since David Dinkins was defeated by Rudy Giuliani back in the 1993 election. Usually, mayors serve for multiple terms. I know that Eric Adams saw his legacy like that of Governor LaGuardia. He said that he's going to Mayor LaGuardia rather. He said he's going to be remembered as one of the great mayors. He may be just a footnote in history now because he serves as a one-term mayor. He's going to spend the next part of his administration trying to consolidate his legacy. But the real question is, where do his supporters go? Where did that 8% go? I think that they could concenter around Andrew Cuomo, as Andrew Cuomo being potentially the moderate alternative, if you will, to Mr. Mamdani. I think that I think that he potentially could benefit, but it's really going to be kind of on the margins, because if you look at the primary, for example, Mr. Mamdani won by 13 points, and he's currently ahead by 14 points. So Andrew Cuomo really needs to do a royal straight flush, if you will, to try to catch up and to try to potentially upset Mr. Mamdani, who is currently the preponderant favorite.
And before we move on to discuss a little bit more about the remaining candidates, you see 4 of them here. Mayor Eric Adams officially out, so we have 3 candidates left. But Rich, going back to this point that you made, Mayor Eric Adams, only a one-term mayor. That's obviously not what he wanted heading into this political realm, being the mayor of the largest city in the country. So what happened? Where did this shift change? Why did he fall off like this?
There were some corruption scandals during his administration. He allegedly took bribes. And then the Trump administration basically wiped away the charges that were against him. But a couple of things here. First of all, there were the ethics charges, which brought down his job approval rating. Then there was the fact that he was seen as being almost alligated or tethered, if you will, to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is very unpopular in New York City, and the last thing you want is support from the Trump administration in New York City, unless you are a Republican running in a Republican primary or something to that effect. But those are really the two scenarios. He won a very hotly contested race when he won in the primary. He was seen as, if you will, the more moderate candidate. This time around, I think moderates tend to be more aggregated toward Andrew Cuomo and not toward Mr. Adams. Adams was seen more or less of kind of a footnote in the campaign. Very few people thought he had an actual chance of winning, despite what he averred himself. I think most people, most political aficionados, believe that he was more or less that it was more or less be who would he take votes away from, not who would he, not necessarily not necessarily how he could potentially be victorious or win the campaign. I think also he, like potentially Andrew Cuomo, if you listen to his speech, he talked about how he fears. He didn't mention Mr. Zoran Mandani specifically, but he basically talked about his trepidation about somebody who would make radical changes in New York City. I think now it's Mr. Mandani is basically trying to present himself as somebody who will do everything he can to try to eliminate the affordability crisis in New York City and potentially appear a little bit more moderate than the kind of master narrative or the caricature of him by some on the right wing.
And speaking of the affordability crisis, when we talk to our partners at Fox 5 in New York who are following this story very closely, they say that that is one of the biggest issues for New Yorkers at this time. Rich, before I let you go, as we mentioned, now just 3 people left in this mayoral race for New York City. Zoran Mamdani is in the lead right now. Is it possible that we can get an upset, though, from here until Election Day?
Well, very few people, when Mr. Mandani announced his candidacy for the Democratic nomination, he was pretty much an afterthought. Very few people thought that he, even his supporters, I think, thought that he was actually had a chance of making this a close race. He started at about 3% in the polls, and he landed up winning by 13 percentage points. 13 percentage points. So theoretically, with Mr. Adams out of the race, if his support really craters, and a lot of those people potentially either stay home or go to Andrew Cuomo, then yes, Andrew Cuomo does have a shot. But right now, I think that the preponderant front runner is Zoran Mandani, and I think that it's really his election to lose at this point.
All right, Rich Rubino, political analyst and historian. Always good to have you here at Live Now from Fox, discussing all things politics, especially that big breaking news from over the weekend. Mayor Eric Adams out, and now there's just 3 left. We'll talk soon.
Thanks. That sounds good.